participants to still put in questions into the chat, and Mary and myself will sort of follow the chat, and then we'll ask questions at the end. Okay, perfect. So, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started here in just a few minutes as we wait for a few more attendees to jump on. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Utah Homeless Management Information System, Policy, Data Standards, and User Feedback. My name is Haley Hinckley, and I am a UHIMIS System Administrator with the Utah Office of Homeless Services. Joseph Jensen, the Data Manager for our team, is also here with me. This session will be 1 hour long. If you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Myself and Joseph will be monitoring the questions to answer any logistical issues that may come up. Questions for the presenter will be answered time permitting. With that said, I'd like to introduce our presenter for this session. Lynn Sharp is also a UHIMIS System Administrator for the Utah Office of Homeless Services. Lynn has worked in homeless services for over 10 years, starting on the front lines by doing intakes at an emergency shelter, and now focuses her time on everything that impacts UHIMIS data quality. Lynn's passion is to support those serving people who are homeless or formerly homeless by constantly working to reduce the data entry burden put upon them. Lynn, thank you for being here, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Haley. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so like Haley said, I'm Lynn. I'm just going to jump into this. And if you read the description of this session, you saw it was a choose your own adventure type of style of presentation. So you can choose that adventure by scanning this QR code or going to the link here with your camera. Just make sure you can still see this presentation, however you decide to do that. And that way we can kind of get into that, you tell me what you want to learn about thing. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to figure that out. I have a timer here, but don't worry if you don't get it in that time, because I'll keep this link up as we talk through the questions. I'm going to set a timer so I can give myself 30 seconds. Okay, so hopefully you got it. If you didn't, it's still there. My first question, I'm just going to start this quiz right here, if I can get it to click. I just want to know where you are. So the survey should have opened, somebody was able to answer it, so somebody was able to get it. I'll give you another few seconds to answer that and we'll jump back into the slides. And I was hoping I could make this show up half and half. If you're not sure, you can just make your best guess for balance of state. Because I know that doesn't actually go north, south, east, west like that. So do your best. Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds or so to respond. Awesome, thank you so much. So this is the slide on that. The next one is I just want to know what are you doing? And this just tells me where you are. I like to point out where people are because I like to say that this is a statewide system, and that's actually fairly unique for Utah. And I think it's really cool that we have this statewide implementation of an HMIS. Also, to be really honest, this is just to make sure that the survey is working. So there you go. Okay, so the next question here is, what are you doing? And I'll give you guys a minute to respond to this one too. Okay, I think I'm going to stop it a little bit early. So it looks like we got all of our responses. We got a lot of gurus of case management, which is awesome. And other rock stars. I'm sorry I didn't get you in our questions, but I think you're all rock stars, just so you know. I'm glad to be on your crew to help you out with what we do. Okay, now this is actually the real question. I need your help in choosing your adventure. I'm going to keep this question open for a little bit, so you can grab it and you can think about what you want to add. Pick a few things that you want to learn about, and then I'll just do them in the order that, well, I'll do it from like the highest to lowest with how much time we have left. Awesome. In the meantime, I'm going to come over here and we're going to talk about some boring stuff, because the first one of the things we were going to talk about is policy. And if you didn't know, we have new HMIS standard called operating procedures. It was approved on July 1 of this year. If you don't know where to find it, that's where you go to get it. It's a really long document. I recommend you read through it, or at least give it a good skim, because anybody who's an HMIS user, you have to follow these procedures, and they've changed. They haven't changed too terribly dramatically, but it's still worth double checking. We've clarified a lot of points in there, and it can help you answer questions with your clients. I want to make sure that you're aware of two really important big changes that will affect you and the clients that you're serving the most in these changes with it. And the first one is the informed consent. And hopefully you've seen the new informed consent by this point. It now includes lines where you have to track the dependents of the people that you're serving, and they have to be identified in that. They have to be identified on that before you can release their information within HMIS, or you can share their information. I know this is a pain. We went back and forth on this with our attorney as we were going through this and kind of talking through how does this work for agencies and the clients you're serving. But it really is to really ensure that you are sharing that, or that consent of that child's information is being shared, or that dependent's information being shared is there, and that's how we prove it. You don't need to ask the client to re-sign it if a child is removed from a household. So if they're no longer being served in that household, so long as that information that they had shared already is still okay to be shared. You do need to have them sign it if they add a new dependent, to that household. So if they have some other child or dependent come in, ask them to sign one. You just need to have them sign it for that one dependent. You don't have to write down everybody else on it, but you do need something there. And then only one parent or guardian has to do it. So in multi-parent or guardian households, you only have to have one sign it for those children. The other one can just sign it for themselves. Hopefully saves you a little ink as you're filling this out. We added a timeline to how long these informed consents are valid for as well. They're valid for 7 years, so you have lots of time to make sure that they're okay. In most projects, they don't even come close to extending that long. But if you're working with client or with families or whatever in a very long time, they could potentially, the last time they have signed it was 7 years ago. The thing with this is that we have to make sure, or that the agency is responsible to make sure that once that informed consent expires, they are restricting any of that additional information that's entered into the system until they get a new informed consent. It doesn't automatically turn off sharing if it's been 7 years. It's on the agency to follow that. And then for consent, we just want to give the clients the opportunity to consent every time their information is shared in the system. What we recommend as a best practice to do that is to actually just have them re-sign an informed consent. I know that signing the same form over and over and over and over again can get really annoying, to put it nicely, but it's to give that client, that person, that family, that opportunity to say, yes, I'm okay with you sharing this kind of information about me again for this particular project on this day. The other thing that you could potentially do is just review a pre-existing consent that you have on file. We're working on making it available in the system a little bit easier to track it. But just giving them that opportunity to consent before their information is shared again allows them to do that. And an easier way to do that is just have them re-sign that informed consent. So those are the three big things with the informed consent that changed since the data standards update, since our new standard operating procedures update. The other thing is, I just wanted to point out, we also have a privacy policy and a privacy posting. This is policy, but it's kind of something that came up when we did our monitoring this year. What we came to understand is that a lot of people myself included when I was a user, confused the privacy posting with the privacy policy. The privacy posting is that one pager. We ask you to stick it up on your wall so that in clear sight of anybody when you're putting data into the system or when you're collecting data for them for the system. It's this guy right here. That's the posting. The policy here is it's actually a 10-page document that covers in detail all of the policy and procedures and privacy policies and procedures and data and security policies and procedures that we have established for Client Track. And so there's no way we can put all of that into a single one-page privacy posting that is like 8-point font, because that's what it is. It might be 9-point font if we're really lucky. So we did the best we could with that posting, but really this full policy is it. You can find this policy in a few places. It's on our website. These slides will be posted on our website by the end of the day today. So you'll have this link. You'll have to go to the website to find this link, but there you go. It's also in HMIS. So if you're an HMIS user, it's on your homepage and it's just right here in this Welcome to Client Track screen. And you can click this and it'll take you to that document. And really all that document is just an extract from our full standard operating procedures, but it's just that part. So if you have a client asking for the privacy policy, if you want to look through it yourself, you can just look at those pages so that you can get an idea of what it says. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the poll. Hopefully everybody was able to vote. Oh, look at that. Yes, it worked. I'm so excited. Okay, so I'm going to pause this poll right here. And it looks like our number one thing we're going to talk to is the data standards that impact everyone, those new data standards. These are tied, which is awesome because I love this new feature, improving your data quality. And then if we have time, we'll talk about these street outreach and this coordinated entry. Like I said, these slides will be posted for you at the end of the day. These topics are in all of these slides. So don't worry if we don't go through the one you want to talk through, because it is available for you and you can come, you'll be able to get to it as well. So I'm going to put this over here so I can remember which ones we were talking to. And then I'm going to go to Adventure 1, the data standards, and I'm going to have to close that. Sorry, I'm rearranging stuff on another screen that you can't see. Okay. So the first one we'll talk through is those data standards. I'm just going to cover the data standard updates that impact every single user. And it really is just talking through the race, ethnicity, and gender changes that happened. And so the first one that was a big change, and these changes, before I talk through it more, they're really just about making the system more inclusive. There has been a real effort from HUD and from the understanding they have made. They have like worked with experts in the field in making the system more inclusive to like better serve the clients we're serving, and in particular those who may have been put at risk or may have felt marginalized by how the questions were asked before or what it was asked before. And so that's really what these changes are. And we expect to see more with the next one coming down the road, which will be in 2024. We expect to see more of these types of changes as that conversation in the nation is changing and growing. I went to a training fairly recently where we talked through some of these data standard changes and how like HUD is thinking through it. And they made a really good point about these changes, about how like every single question that you ask a client, if it's their name, their date of birth, to like their barrier information, their health status info, any question that you ask for them for HMIS, it's potentially traumatizing to a person, and they're keeping that in their mind as they're reworking how they're asking these questions and they're looking through them for these updates. The first one with ethnicity, really what happened is that the language changed a little bit to be more inclusive of people of Latina or Latinx identity, and that's really the big change with ethnicity. I see there's a question. I'm actually going to come back to those after, that way I don't mess myself up, but you see it there. For race, the same thing. There's just been some reworking of the languages. Again, they worked with experts to figure out these changes in some more appropriate language for race. I imagine there will be some more updating with the next data standards update as well, but it's just about making things more inclusive. And then for gender, this is the really big change when it comes to how data is coded in our system anyway. It's not the biggest change for us day to day, But on the back end, it's a pretty big change on how our system is working. And they're just identifying that they've identified better language for gender identifiers. They've also identified that somebody could identify themselves with multiple things. So if you have a person who identifies themselves as transgender and female, then you could mark both of those things in the system. If you do have somebody that's identifying as transgender, make sure that you identify how they prefer to be, or how they want to be identified in the system. That way, like, it's there, it's a multi-choice option. But you have a few options here that allow you to have that flexibility that we just didn't have before with a single drop list item. Yeah, I don't know what else to say with this. I do actually have another slide, I'm sorry. So since I did the recertification training, I found this additional research about talking about gender identity and why it's so important, because when we talk about gender in HMIS, it's not their biological gender that we're talking about, it's their gender identity. And this quote here is from Sam Killerman, and this the genderbread person infographic here is also from them. And it talks through that, like, your gender identity is all about how you think about yourself, and it's about how you would internally interpret the chemistry that composes you as you know it, and if you think you fit better into the role of woman or man, or does neither, that's all part of the gender identity. That's what it is, and that's what we're going for. So if, like, you have a person and you have a document and they have something that says that, like, their sex is one thing and they're telling you they identify otherwise, that's what it is in HMIS, because that's what we're looking for, is their identity, instead of like their sex marker, if you will. And it's important because we want to make sure that the people that we're serving, we're recognizing them for who they think they are, and not by what we see on a piece of paper or what we're assuming they are. With this change to gender, this is a change that we made as a statewide policy for HMIS. We have updated our naming conventions. So previously, we would say that if somebody had a preferred name, we would ask you to put their full legal name in this field, the first name and last name box, and then we would ask you to put their preferred name in parentheses afterwards. What I have learned, and what we have learned, and why we have changed our policy, is that a person who has, like, a dead name, that could potentially cause harm to a client. Imagine you are a transgender identifying person who is checking into an emergency shelter facility, and the identification of their dead name comes out by accident because your preferred name, your name, is in parentheses. Now everybody that you are being served with knows that you identify as transgender, and now that is genuinely a risk that could happen to that person, and it turns into a potential barrier for services. So we don't ever want to put somebody in danger because we need to collect data to do our jobs. So if there is a danger to the client and it's the client's determination that that danger is there, put in their pseudonym, put in their name. I keep using pseudonym because it's on the slide, but really, like, if this person has a dead name, don't use the one that's on the documents, put in their name.
Lynn, can I ask you a related question that just came up in the chat?
Yes, of course.
Quick. So there's a question, they said, the updated gender options have been a wonderful addition to the system, and that it would be nice to be able to put a client's preferred pronouns somewhere as well. Could they kind of follow that same naming convention and put pronouns, perhaps in parentheses, in their name to kind of help navigate that?
I think that's a really great idea, to be really honest. It's something that I wish was on there as a part of the data standards, and I hope will come with our next round. I haven't run that particular naming convention by our data subcommittee, but I don't foresee that being an issue. The whole thing that we use namings for is to help us deduplicate clients, which is also why we wanted to have that full legal name in there previously, is to help us identify, like, hey, John Smith is the same John Smith over here, let's put them together. So having something in parentheses after that name doesn't really change our ability to be able to deduplicate those records. And so if there is, if you would like to put in those pronouns, I don't think there's any harm to go with that. And I think it can be really helpful for that client as well. So I think that's a great idea, and I should write that down. So thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next slide here. Maybe clicked something and now it's not clicking there. All right, some other changes that impact everybody. Change in earned income and non-cash benefits. Basically, if they're over 18 or they age into adulthood while they're being served in this program, you now have to collect income. It should be from their 18th birthday. There's some funniness with the logic of the system, but basically if they turn 18, you do an annual assessment or an exit on that family or that household. You're now putting income in for them, so make sure you're asking them that question. Mental health and substance use were both renamed to be mental health disorder and substance use disorder, again, making it less traumatizing, more inclusive. And in our system, we do have it separated out. Substance use disorder is actually alcohol use disorder and drug use disorder. That's a little funniness with those data standards that allow us to kind of identify which is which. And then for coordinated entry, we added 3 new events. If anybody has actually used any of these events, I will be really excited. You have to use them. They are a HUD requirement as a part of coordinated entry, but I know that not every community is using them all. These are some new ones to make it a little more useful for you. Okay, so our next adventure we wanted to look at was, let's see, the next one was a cool new feature coming in December, and then 3 tips on improving your data quality. I'm going to start with this feature just because it kind of goes into it. So let's go to, okay. So the cool new feature, I'm super excited about this. I'm also like, I didn't think this would actually make it into this training because I didn't think you guys would, like that would get voted, but I'm excited it is. So in December-ish, we are going to launch provider workspaces. And what a provider workspace will look like, it'll come in, it'll look kind of like when we added coordinated entry, where you have like your home workspace, your client's workspace, you have your coordinated entry workspace, and then next to that, you will have your provider workspace. And what this does is makes those CE events more useful for you. The challenge with CE events is that you never know what agency is providing what service, and like who you can actually send those referrals to. This is going to let you see that, and it's going to let you do it in a very real way. This is the provider dashboard that you'll see, and it gives you an overview of what that provider does. So like this one is just a test. We have a coordinated entry provider. And so it gives you like their address and their phone number and their best person to call or email. It gives you a list of their contacts. There can be as many as the agency or the provider wants to put on there. And then a little lower, you can see all of the clients that are referred to that provider. So you can see like who's waiting for service and who has things already there just on their dashboard. You'll be able to search for the provider you're looking for. You can look for it statewide. And as this is getting used more and more, it'll help you kind of decipher things that are happening with the coordinated entry to make your coordinated entry processes easier, but also to maybe make your job a little bit easier, because you'll be able to send these referrals via client track instead of having to do it via email. It follows the client's record. It's just good, guys. I don't know how else to tell you, but it's just good. Okay. Like I said, you'll be able to search any provider that exists in the system. You'll be able to see the services they're providing. So you'll be able to go in and you'll say, okay, they do all of this stuff. This is actually the only thing that fell off that dashboard that you'll be able to access. You'll be able to see like, okay, cool. They do this type of housing. Great. I can refer this client over there. And here's the part that's really cool and gets me as the data nerd really excited. This second menu in that provider workspace, this provider security officers menu, will be only visible to those of you who are security officers, which I don't know if there's a lot of you on this call right now, but every agency has a security officer that's designated for their agency. And if you are that security officer, and there can be more than one for your security officer, you'll be able to go in and edit your information. As your agency, as you're starting to receive services for new things, like you now picked up, you got funding to do this new thing, you can now say, hey, we can take referrals. You'll be able to identify who you can take referrals from. You can update your contact information. You can update like everything that you can do without bugging the HMIS lead. Not that we don't want you bugging us, and we're going to be here to train you, of course. Like, I'm not just going to let this go and hopefully you figure it out. But it allows you to have that dynamic use of this so that it is more useful for the clients, and it's more useful for the other people interacting with your agency as a provider. Which I think is really, really cool. It's something that we will hopefully be able to launch into other parts of the system to give you a little bit more editing access for your agency. Right now, we're going to start with this and see how it goes and tweak as we go. Okay, moving on to this data quality thing. There are 3 tips that I have. Okay. There are 3 tips that I have to help you improve your data quality, just as like case manager, user, or just anybody who's accessing the system. The first one is remember your dates. Dates are super important, and they're a great source of fiber. But also, like, your dates are, like, if they mismatch, they're entered incorrectly, they don't reflect the days you're serving them, it can cause some really major reporting issues. You would think that our system, it's super smart, it can figure out these things. It can't. And things like a mistyped date, like I have this, I don't know if you guys can see this well because it's really small on my screen, but this approximate start date, homeless start date, it's a part of the entry assessment workflow. You see it pretty much anytime you enroll a client who is experiencing little homelessness into the system. This date can be put in incorrectly. In this one, it's 8/1/1921. So this client was probably entered, their approximate start date was probably something closer to like 8/1/2021. But that 100-year difference for that one enrollment, for that one client, can skew a measure called the average length of time that we use with our system performance measures. It's one that looks at this one specifically because there's a couple of those. It can skew it up several days, just one mistyped. And that's the thing that happens with any mistyped date. It's just a really great example of it. I'm working on those system performance measures right now, and with permission with the community that's impacted, I'm sharing this information with you guys. Last year's system performance measures report, we looked at this measure and we compared it to this year's system performance measures report, and this community, along with us as a team, because like we're realizing how much they really, really, really matter, has spent the entire year fixing bad approximate homeless start dates. And what we saw is that measure decreased by a little over 42%. And there hasn't been a significant change in what they're doing. They're doing awesome work. It's COVID times. The work is really hard right now. It certainly didn't decrease quite that much. It was because their data is more correct and they're getting that information in right, and they're paying attention to that approximate date homeless started. And just in case, because I'm putting so much emphasis on this one, the approximate date homeless started is the date this episode of homelessness started by the HUD definition of homelessness. So like the very first day that they were in emergency shelter or a place not meant for habitation, that's, or a safe haven, but there's no safe havens in Utah. So it's that very first day, this time. So if they've been in and out, they've been couch surfing, they're paying for a motel on their own, they had an apartment, they've been experiencing several episodes of homelessness, this date is that the very first day of this last episode that started. So like, it's not the beginning of their life or several years ago when this started, it's when did it start this time? Okay, my second tip, finish your workflows. Okay, so I want you all to close your eyes, and I was a case manager once, so I wrote this from this case manager thing. Imagine the scenario. You are entering a new client into your program and someone interrupts you with a crisis that requires your immediate attention. You lock your screen with Control L because you've listened to our trainings and you know to do that, and you run off to take care of that crisis. 3 hours later, that fire is put out, you put your fire extinguisher away. You finally are able to get back into HMIS, you log in, it takes you back to that last client you were working on, and you can't quite remember where you were, but it looks like you have finished your assessment workflow. Sweet, right? You know where this is going because I'm the data person and I'm telling you to finish your workflows. And like in this scenario, you know, but like in real life, it's easy to forget. Except when you leave the system mid workflow, it doesn't finish that workflow because you didn't put all that information in, but it kind of looks like you did. And it takes like digging in, and you have to click on several buttons, which is what these pictures are showing you, to see that you didn't finish your workflow, that you didn't do everything. And to be really honest, nobody does that, right? Because you have 10,000 other things you have to do. So what you can do to make sure that you're finishing your workflows is take advantage of this paused operations option that you have. Make it a habit to go in and check this every once in a while. Put a reminder in your calendar for once a week, especially if you're that person that's putting out those fires every day. Like, just put it in, double check it every once in a while. And if it's been a while, if you've been using the system for a while, if you've never knew this was here, because like we don't show you this when we do our new end user training, you might have a ton of paused workflows here. Take a minute, go through them all, figure out what's not done yet, finish them, and get rid of the ones that are. Because it's also very likely that you remembered that, hey, you didn't finish it, and so you went through it again. If you leave a workflow halfway through it, and then you come back through it on the client's page, like back here, it's still going to show up as a paused workflow on this page. So you just got to double check, make sure that information is there, and then just check it regularly, and you'll have however many. If you're doing it once a week, hopefully it's not more than a handful, and you'll be able to go, okay, cool, I finished that, great, move on. It's a part of your data quality cleanup. It's a part of making sure that data is good. Missing data in the system is a really big deal. It causes problems on our data quality reports. It makes it so that we can't answer the questions we're trying to answer because we don't have it to answer it. So make sure you double check it. And then just because we've never really trained on this, when you look at those paused workflows, you're going to see these three options. So most of the time when I'm going to this, resume workflow is your best option, because it'll take you right back to the last page it's saved. And you'll be able to keep working on it. You'll have to re-enter anything that you were in there doing, but it'll take you back to that page. Restart workflow will start you at the very beginning of it, and then delete workflow is just saying, hey, this is done. You're not deleting a workflow in the system in this way. You're not going to go and delete all that stuff you already did. It's just taking it off your list of things to do. So like I said, if you are coming back to this for the first time, you've never known this has been there, you've been in the system for several years, and you have 1,000 of these there, and you know you've gone through and done these, you've gone in, you've double checked, you can just go back, you can delete it and then move on, and you don't have to worry about it again. I also recommend, if you're not sure what to do, look up the client that it's telling you about and making sure that the assessment is completely done, so that you can go through and delete it, or you know what to do with that workflow. Okay. My next tip is just make sure you're paying attention to your enrollments. This is that enrollment screen that shows up on just on that client's dashboard. And if you watch this page, you can see that there's funny things going on with the data. And like this is a test client, so like there's some funny things going on with this data. But there's a few things I can point out here. So the very first thing is that the project start date for the CE enrollment and the housing move-in date for the PSH project, they don't align. So clients who are enrolled in coordinated entry are generally, not always, generally they're considered to be literally homeless in the community. So if you have somebody with a move-in date that falls before their coordinated entry date, there's something a little funny there. Are they still in that project? Are they still housed? Because if they're not still housed, then that is something that you need to address. If somebody is in permanent housing, permanent supportive housing with a move-in date, they lose that housing option. They should be exited from that enrollment, and they can be re-enrolled on the same day, so that you can retain that original move-in date, and you can identify, like, hey, this person's literally homeless again. And then you can put them into that coordinated entry project, and you say, like, they still have this voucher, they can still use this money, but they're starting over on this, and they're moving into another place. If somebody moves from one unit to another on that, they don't touch literal homelessness in that time. You do not have to do that process because their move-in date stands. They didn't return to literal homelessness.
Lynn,
yes.
can I interrupt you? We do have
yes.
a hand up. Would you mind taking a question?
Of course, I'm happy to.
So Tony, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, it was back to the homelessness start date. So I'm understanding like the literal homelessness definition in the beginning of this last episode of homelessness. So what I've been doing with people, women, sorry, not just women, but survivors of domestic violence, is a lot of times they will leave an abuser and then return and then leave and then return. And that can happen several months. So my question is, do you go to just maybe the first time that they left? Because
No.
sometimes that can be years.
Mhm. No, you're going to go to the beginning of this episode. So if somebody is in that cycle, it would just be like the day they left this last time. You're not going to go back the 5-10 years. Hopefully it's not 10 years, but like it might be. You're going to go back to when they became homeless this time. So whatever that day is, it could have been yesterday. And where you're going to represent those multiple episodes over that time is in those other questions on that, on the prior living situation, where it's asking how many episodes have they had in the last 3 years and how many months have they been homeless. The approximate homeless start date is just saying like, this is the day they became homeless this time.
You consider an episode being they leave, they don't spend the night there, and maybe they go back the next day. That would still count as an episode?
So what we usually will look at for an episode, this is a great question, Tony. An episode is generally 7 nights.
Okay.
7 nights housed with a, like, that's kind of our sweet spot of like where there's a break in homelessness and then there's an episode of homelessness. So like if they return for 7 nights, then that's a break. And so their new episode starts that next day. Yeah. Thank you. That was a great question. I wish I could have gone back, but I'm so deep in these slides, I don't think I would have been able to find my way back here. Cool. I'm going to move on to this. The next thing on this page was, I just wanted to point out this permanent supportive housing project doesn't have any assessments associated with it. You will be able to see their last assessment date on here. And it should have one, especially since this project has been open for more than a year, there should be one that aligns with the annual assessment date. So there should be one that's like 7/1/2021 here, or within that 60-day window, and it's just missing. And that's a huge red flag. You're not going to get any data out of that project. The next one is that this client was marked as deceased on 10/17/2019. So either they're a zombie, or it's an incorrect data, or the incorrect client, or the exit destination is wrong. In any case, there's some data cleanup that needs to happen here. Maybe there's some merging. Some clients do have very similar names, and I've seen this happen where like maybe a parent with a similar name of a child passed away, but the child is still around. Now that child's information is being put on that parent's account. So like being aware of where they went is a good thing. And then the last thing I have on here is that the closed projects, they both have someone still enrolled in them. And I know you can't see this from looking at this, but like this is kind of just generally a red flag if you see a number there and you know that like, hey, there shouldn't be anybody still enrolled in this project. In this case, it's a 2-year-old child that's all by themselves. And so just like watching who's still enrolled, if there is an active household member in a closed enrollment, like double check it. You can click on it on the action button, click on case members, and it will tell you who else is in that project, so you can look and see if they're still enrolled. Because from the recertification, the new end user standards, the 2022 standards video, if you got that far into it, something that we noted was that you should have one head of household or self for any enrollment ever. And so once that when this adult was exited and that child was remaining in the program, there was no self associated with that child because it was like child of head of household or something. And that will throw also major data errors. So you just want to be aware if there's somebody still floating around in your project, you probably didn't exit them all. Okay, let's see. The next one, I have about 5 more minutes. I can do the next one we chose, which was street outreach, auto exits, and coordinated entry. Let's go to street outreach and auto exits because it's fairly quick. If I can find it. Let's see. There. Okay. So street outreach, auto exits. Hopefully this is impacting you. It's really just a change for those of you who are working in a street outreach project that has an auto exit on it, which is like basically all street outreach projects. Basically, what happens is when a enrollment is ready to auto exit, and for most of our street outreach projects, that means they haven't received a service for 90 days, and it will auto exit back to that last service date. When that enrollment's ready to auto exit, what it will do is instead of auto exiting to that last service date, it will auto exit to the last It'll auto exit to the last current living situation. Current living situation is entered at an entry assessment. And unless you're putting it in, because you should be putting in a current living situation every single time you serve somebody in street outreach, unless you're putting that in when you're serving them, it's very possible that it will exit it all the way back to the entry assessment. I have an example here to show you in the training database. I'm actually going to pull this off that screen just in case, because I don't think I had that client there. I think this might be the last thing I get to go through, and then we'll jump into your feedback. So think about what you want to tell us. Okay. So here's my example client. They have this street outreach project here. You can see they were auto exited on January 1st to no, or sorry, not January, September 1st, 2021, no exit interview completed. If we look at the services they have received for this enrollment, there are services that were attached to it well after that date. So you would think that that auto exit should be 9/15. But because we know that it's going to go back to the current living situation, if we look at current living situation, the only one they ever have recorded is the one that happened at the entry assessment, which means when it auto exited, it went all the way back to that entry assessment. Now, all of the services that were attached to this, they're still kind of there, but if we go in to look at these, they're not actually attached to any service anymore, any enrollment. So they're there, they happened, but they didn't really, because they don't attach to anything. And it looks like you only served this client for less than a day. Make sure you put in your current living situations. We're working on a way to make it so that you can do it at the same time. It is not ready to go. I was really hoping it would be by this point, but technology. So make sure you put in a current living situation every single day you serve somebody in street outreach so that it will backdate to the correct day. And you can do that by clicking on living situation, add new. You select the enrollment. I'll just use this one because it's open. And then you tell us where they're staying tonight. For street outreach, this is required every single time you serve them. For night by night emergency shelter, which is primarily in Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County, this is every time you're serving them with more than just a basic shelter service, essentially, basically more than it would mean to keep their body alive. And with coordinated entry, it's also every single time you're serving them with a coordinated entry project. I know it's a pain. You have to do two things, but especially for these auto exiting projects like street outreach, you don't want it to backdate to where it just looks like you're serving a client per day, because then you're not recording any of that information. They're not getting that like living history in the system. It's not working the way that you think it's working without that extra piece of information in the system. Let's see, I have 2 more minutes on this. I think I can go through it. Let's see if I get lucky. Okay. And then the next one was the coordinated entry of let's see, coordinated entry, intake, update, and exit. You know what? I actually don't think I have enough time to go through this all. Like I said, I am going to post these, but because this is a fairly robust section of this. So I'm going to jump down here to the end. I want your feedback. I want to know, what can we do better? And I want to know this all the time, not just because it's a summit and we're all like really excited to be here. Like, do you have an awesome idea? You do this every day. You have to work with the system every day. Is there something we can do to make your job easier? And if there are anything in the questions or the chat, you can raise your hand. You can scan this link. You can go to it. It's on our website. I want to know about it. So tell me. I think I actually messed up my time a little bit. Well, if there's anything, I was hoping we'd have 15 minutes of conversation.
Yeah, Lynn, you got some time here. So we have a couple questions that have come through.
Cool.
First one for you, I think, is probably something we need to talk through specifics with the person. But the question is, okay. I've heard discussion about non-HMIS agencies wanting access to an approved HMIS agency data. Is this allowed, considering the non-HMIS agency would have access to data to include possible changes to the data? So yeah, basically, could a non-HMIS participating agency access an HMIS participating agency's data in the system?
So the informed consent release form, and I'm happy to answer this question directly with this person. Joe probably knows who it is, but I'm not looking at the Q&A, so I don't. Anyway, the informed consent allows you to share information about that client within HMIS. That's all they're agreeing to do, and you're allowing to share it with the other people that access the system. a lot of agencies do have additional releases of information that allow them to share that client's information outside of the system. So like if they have a partnership with a local community resource, they may have this client sign something additional to allow them to discuss this client's information to serve that client better. So if there's something like that in place, yes, it's fine. If there is a non-HMIS participating agency and they just want access to the system in general, they want to get all of this information, we ask that they bring it to the UHMIS steering committee for a review. And they can start that process by emailing us at hmis@utah.gov, or like that contacts there. It's a good place to find that. So that we can look through their request and identify if it's appropriate or not. And then we will help them bring that to the steering committee to look through, like, what is the need? Why are they doing it? Let's go through it that way. There are some cases where there are some agencies that do have read-only access to the system that has been approved by the UHMIS steering committee. And now they're considered a participating agency because of that process that they went through, and they have gone through specialized training to understand what they're accessing and why they're getting this information. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
And then the next question is, why is head of household still a thing? And who is the head of household in a couple?
Head of household is a thing primarily for data, really. We need, as far as I can understand it, and Joe or Haley, you're welcome to interrupt me here. But it allows us to tag a lot of those data elements that they're either collected for like the household in general, or for like that primary person you're serving to someone. It just allows you to like identify someone in the system, and there has to be like this, there has to be a unique identifier. This head of household is that unique, like that main person in that system, and there's a lot of reports that look at that information that go in there. When it comes to who it should be in a two adult household, I usually will defer to that becomes an agency policy or a community policy. We allow people to, and HMIS data standards allow people to identify their households however they want. Their families could be extended families, friends, whatever, however they want to identify their family structure. If they all want to be served together, that in our eyes is a family. And who the head of household in that case is up to that family and to the agency that they're being served with.
Thanks. Yeah, that was both of our questions.
Cool. Okay. Well then, oh, I see somebody has a hand up. Am I blind?
So that would be Tony. Go ahead and ask your question.
Raising my hand because head of household totally matters. We came into a situation where we had two adults and we had to explain when they broke up who was the head of household, right? This person was the one that was eligible for the funding. This is the SPDAT we use. This is the person that qualified. Because you are no longer in that household, we now need to find a different funding source for you. But the head of household keeps the funding. So for us, head of household has become actually a really hot topic with us, and we've had to write policies about that.
Okay. Yeah. Tony, can I ask you a question? In that situation, were there children that followed, or was it a two adult household? So it was
just two adults, no children.
Okay, interesting, because that's like, because I primarily work with families. So when I think about that situation, I think about a family with children where one is leaving.
Well, let's say they did. What would you say to that? Because I want to know your thoughts.
So if a family with children and like one of the adults, like there's a two adult household with a couple of children involved, oftentimes those vouchers are like family-based vouchers where like you have to have a child to qualify for it, or that like structure. And so it would most likely stay with that family, the like the majority of people that are left in the household.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ours aren't linked to that.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's just how I've served clients too. Like that's why I'm thinking of it that way. That's a really good thought. I can look into more about how head of households are designated. I'd be really interested to see that policy that you've written so that like I can train to it better. you don't mind sending it my way, I'd appreciate it. I'm writing it down. Okay. So with 10 minutes left and no more questions, let's just hit up the next thing. Let's see if we can get through this coordinated entry thing.
Lynn, I do have one other
yes.
question
great.
that just came
Yeah.
in, and let me
Awesome.
know if you want me to jump in at all on this. But the question is,
Yeah.
what is the plan for replacing the VI SPDAT?
Yeah, Joe, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure, I would love to.
Thanks.
So great question. First of all, we know that there have been concerns about the VI SPDAT in our community for a while, and now that WARE code's moving away from it, it is something we are really diving into and exploring. Where do we go as a community from here? There is a task group through the Utah Homeless Network that is pulling together coordinated entry leads and some experts in the field to try to dive into kind of what are our needs in an assessment. And they're going to be kind of spearheading that process of reviewing what options are out there and bringing some recommendations to that network, which has representation from each LHC, the local homeless council in the state, to go through kind of the pros and cons of different options and find something that will work for us. We definitely want to make sure that we're getting this right, that we're getting something that both addresses the equity concerns that have been raised about the VI SPDAT, but also that really tailors our response so that we are prioritizing for the people that are the most vulnerable and that will be impacted the most by getting into different types of services. And so if that's something that you have a lot of interest or expertise in, would like to be a greater part of that process, I would reach out to your local homeless council, engage with them, and they can connect you in with that statewide process of reviewing options.
Thank you, Joe. That's helpful. I've been focused on a few other things recently, so I can't answer that question super well, so thank you. Okay, we have 8 minutes left. I'm gonna go through this fairly quickly. Forgive me. Please reach out to me if you have questions about coordinated entry. Again, this will be posted on our website. I guess I can show you where it'll be posted on the website. I just am going to tweak a couple of things on it, but it'll be utahhmis.org, training materials, and it's going to be at this bullet right here. The link is ready to go. I just need to take out those surveys, that survey poll, and then I'll give you the slides. Okay. So for coordinated entry, just basically how to do an intake, update that information, and exit them. We want to just make sure that, like, you know what coordinated entry is. It's meant to help a community prioritize any limited resources for those in need within the community. Intakes are generally done when a client enters homelessness, either at the very first contact with a homeless service provider or any other contact if there wasn't like an enrollment that was immediately opened. And then CE is mostly used for housing in Utah, but it should be used for those emergency shelter referrals or any other homeless services and community providers. And I know that's different than how it has been functioning in the community, but that is where it's trying to go, is to allow us to provide all or prioritize all of those resources available in the community through a coordinated entry-like process. However, refer to your LHC before you start doing anything in the system, and make sure, but like bug them about it, because this is like a HUD thing that you're supposed to be doing beyond just housing. And then like reach out to us if you have questions too. Enrolling a client into a coordinated entry process is exactly like creating an enrollment for any other project. I know it's moved around a little bit over the last year as we initially implemented coordinated entry. You start on the client's workspace. You click on intake, and then you go through until you get to the program enrollment page after the basic client information, their family members, and you select a coordinated entry project from that list. You may see one or two of them there. You'll select the one that's appropriate. It will be the non-DVSP one, as long as you're not a domestic violence service provider. If you are a DVSP, like I have another training about that, join me. It's on demand now. There you go. You enroll them into it. It goes to the universal data assessment. This is the same one you see with every other enrollment that you see. So fill this out. If you have questions about that, again, you can email us, but this is something that you see with every other enrollment too. And then it goes into this triage assessment. Now, the triage assessment itself, I'll go through this really quick just to be aware of time. This initially was this page, actually, I'm going to come back. These first few questions for the triage assessment, you're just going to identify like the day you ask questions is your assessment date and the information date, where you talk to them. And this will actually default to the list that shows up when you log in, and it says your location there. The contact type is how you spoke to them. So like if I was doing this assessment with somebody right now with you on the other side of this video, I would put it virtual. Most of them, I believe, are done in person still, so you would probably select in person. You could also do it over the phone. What is your household type? Now, this will default depending on how you select your family members when you enroll the family into coordinated entry. Your enrollment, you don't need to change it. You're verified by project, you don't need to change it. This is something that's used by other communities. The way we do coordinated entry, you can leave this blank. It goes on to ask current living situation. Like I said, with coordinated entry, every time you do something with coordinated entry, excuse me, you have to record a current living situation. This is just where they're staying tonight. If they are staying in a place that's not a literally homeless location, it's going to ask you a few follow-up questions. They're yes or no questions. They're not terribly hard, but just there'll be some more that show up. And then the location detail, you're not required to do it, to put anything in there. It could be helpful, especially if they're staying like a place that they're living on the street, to identify where they're staying so you could follow up with them again later. And you do not have to record a contact unless it's required by your agency. Comments. So when you first do this triage assessment, you first enroll them into coordinated entry. Most of the time, these are going to be left blank. You can get back into this and edit this later. And if I have enough time, I'll show you. I have 3 minutes. I don't think I will. You can come back into this later and you can edit it to update comments like they were prioritized for this housing or really wants to live here. You can put that there and everybody would be able to see it as a part of that coordinated entry process. Domestic violence, screening, and referral, these questions are really supposed to identify if this person who is entering homelessness needs to be referred to a domestic violence service provider. The only thing I'll say is if you hit the magic questions here and you get this open comment box, this client probably does need to be referred to a domestic violence service provider. Don't put where they went into this box. You can either enter NA or you can say referred. You have to put something in to get it saved. Do not put the DVSP into this box. The rest of this triage assessment is the diversion assessment. It is meant to prevent an episode of homelessness. In the situation that you're in, it may or may not apply terribly well. Review these questions. The slides will be available. I'm going to skip past the rest of this. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get through this section a little bit. Make sure you finish your workflow. When you finish your workflow, you'll have the option to go straight into a VI SPDAT, or you can come back to it later. If you go into a VI SPDAT, the correct one for the household type that you selected will appear, and you'll be able to answer that VI. If you choose to end it, you can come back to it, and it will still appear for that enrollment. So it just depends on how your community does it, and it depends on where that client is at that time, and it depends on what you're doing there. For updates, while the client's enrolled in coordinated entry, several updates could happen. That VI SPDAT could happen after that entry, comments on that process, CE events, better information could be updated, and anything else, anything that would involve like coordinating the entry of a client into services. There you go. Yeah, so like that's the like update. And then when you exit, where do I start with the CE update? There we go. For exits, every enrollment that you ever create in the system, it's going to have to be closed eventually. It could be 10 years from now, but it will eventually need to be closed. When you exit a CE enrollment, it's relatively simple. You only need to know where they went, when they went, what their health insurance was, and their current living situation. If you are exiting somebody because they moved into permanent housing, you probably know all of that information on their move-in date because you know when they went. Hopefully you've done some sort of during program enrollment when they moved in so that you know that information. You could probably exit them from coordinated entry without following up with the client directly, as long as it's the same day. It's not the same day as the client. The only big challenge we have with these exits right now is that it has to be done by the same agency that exited them or that created that enrollment. So that becomes pretty major and can become really challenging. Please let us know if you're having trouble with this. As you're coordinating with your agencies, hopefully that's something you're able to do. We can help support that, especially if you know that information. Okay, I skipped through that really fast. I'm going to say thank you so much. I'm at time. I really appreciate you coming and listening to me for an hour. Please email us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, everybody, for attending.